Good morning, everyone. My name is Cornelia Stevens. I'm the Executive Director of Top Ray Learning Centers in Wichita, Kansas, and I have the privilege of serving as the chair of the Early Childhood Recommendations panel. I'd like to thank you all for joining us, and for our panel members, thank you for dedicating your time this morning to be here for the first meeting of our new panel. So this is a remote meeting, and today's meeting materials are posted on the panel meetings website, which is on the Children's Cabinet website, kschildrenscabinet.org. Panel members, we'd like you to clearly identify yourself when you begin to speak, and you can use the raise hand feature to show that you'd like to share something, although it's not required, but it does help Lindsay and I kind of know if there's somebody that wants to say something, and so you can just click that icon if you like. This is for today's meeting agenda. We're going to first approve the July agenda. We're going to approve the June meeting minutes. We'll discuss the Kansas Open Forum and processes for that, and give an overview of the panel, discuss panel meeting procedures, and a review of the panel SharePoint hub, where panel members will be able to access all of the materials. We'll have a discussion in terms of the All In for Kansas Kids Tactic Work Group overview. We will talk about what happens when we have like an idea and how we transfer that idea to a recommendation to actually give to the cabinet. We'll give you opportunities to share bright spots. And so start thinking now if there's anything that you would like to share with everyone in terms of bright spots happening within your organization or your community. We'll talk about upcoming meeting schedules, and then we will adjourn. So first on the panel is to approve the July agenda. So Lindsay did send out the July agenda, and so may I have a recommendation to approve the July agenda as presented?
This is Natalie McLean. I'll make a motion to approve the July agenda.
Perfect. May I have a second?
This is Aldana Chestnut. I can second.
Perfect. All those in favor, thumbs up or say aye. And any opposed? Okay, perfect. Now we will have an approval of the June minutes. And so minutes are also sent each month of, for the previous month's agenda items that were discussed. And so do we have any revisions or whatnot to the June minutes? I don't think so. So if none, may I have a motion to approve the June minutes as presented?
This is Maritas. I propose to approve the general minutes.
Perfect. May I have it? Perfect. May I have a second?
This is Tricia Wagoner. I will second.
Perfect. All those in favor, thumbs up or say aye. And any opposed? Okay, if none, then we're good to go there. We do offer an opportunity, especially for those people who are new with the panel. We offer an opportunity for Kansans to present comments and or speak to the panel. And that's the Kansas Open Forum. So we do actually ask people to submit comments through the Kansas Open Forum comment form by 5 o'clock the day preceding each meeting, to share written comments and or sign up to share verbal comments with the panel during this portion of the meeting. We don't have anybody slated today to present, but again, for those of you who are watching on live stream, if in fact there's something that you would like to present to the panel, please go to the Kansas Open Forum comment form and submit the information that you would like to share, because we would love to hear from you. I am now going to pass it over to Melissa Rooker, who is the Executive Director of the Kansas Children's Cabinet, and she's just going to give a welcome and a panel overview for everyone.
Good morning. Thank you, Cornelia. It's great to see everybody this morning. This is the first meeting of the new cycle for the recommendations panel. We follow the state fiscal year timeline. So some of you we know are newly appointed to serve on the panel. We want to welcome you. And for those of you that are continuing on, we appreciate your service and willingness to continue to give your time and attention to the work the recommendations recommendations panel engages in. I wanted to just kind of set the scene about the role of the panel, why it exists, and what it's all about. So the work dates back to efforts that really have been underway since 2019 in a formal way through a collaborative effort known as the Preschool Development Grant. That is a federal grant program that brought 4 state agencies together, and we have been working on systems level change under the auspices of the All In for Kansas Kids. So in 2019, we landed a 1-year planning grant. The we involved is the Children's Cabinet, the Kansas Department of Education, the Kansas Department for Health and Environment, and the Kansas Department for Children and Families. We came together and we did a comprehensive statewide needs assessment, and after developing the findings for the needs assessment, we translated that into a 5-year strategic plan for early childhood. In the strategic plan, goal number 1 is to improve state level coordination, and it outlines a variety of different steps that we based on the input from more than 6,000 Kansans and multiple organizations, we identified areas that we knew we could do a better job of coordinating within the early childhood care and education system. We want to make sure that we are aligned for maximum impact. To that end, one of the gaps that we identified was the lack of an identified state advisory council known as well, it's on the screen, the State Advisory Council on Early Childhood Education and Care. It's part of the federal Head Start legislation that we are required to have an early childhood advisory council. And Kansas, since 2014, had not had an identified organization serving in that role. So the governor issued Executive Order 2002 and named the Kansas Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund as the official Early Childhood Advisory Council for the state. The executive order also recognizes that while the federal law includes certain mandatory or, a prescribed list of positions that should be filled on the panel, certain subject matter experts and organizations that need to be seated on the advisory council, the Children's Cabinet voting board does not possess that group of particular individuals. And so the way we handled that was in the executive order, this early childhood recommendations panel was identified as the structure that needed to be created. So you are a standing committee of the Children's Cabinet. You advise the cabinet in its role as the State Early Childhood Advisory Council. So it is your job to serve as the panel of experts that filter ideas and vet proposals and determine what makes, what it is that would help enhance and improve the delivery of services in our system. And the way we've got things set up is that it's your responsibility to report to the cabinet in its role as the advisory council, and then the cabinet puts that hat on, and when action is needed, the cabinet votes on whether to adopt recommendations or policy changes. So you are an advisory group to our Children's Cabinet. You play a key role in making sure that we stay aligned with our strategic plan and that we are responsive to challenges as they come up, and that you are a place where the communities and folks at the local level can bring recommendations or concerns. You are charged with helping outline solutions and make recommendations for improvement to the system overall. So what that ends up involving is a lot of work throughout the year. I know you have organized into subgroups with particular themes that you're working on that are anchored in the strategic plan goal sections. Sometimes the recommendations don't need to come all the way up to the state advisory council, the children's cabinet. Sometimes there are things that, you know, we have identified that, wait a minute, we can take this back to, you know, be it one of the partner agencies, one of the organizations involved. Sometimes it's work that the power exists to address without a formal recommendation happening, and that's a good thing. That's great when it's the sort of thing that we identify as something we can easily handle without a concerted, you know, coordinated effort. That, oh, you know, if we make this change to this form on the website that, you know, has whatever information, it might improve coordination or you know, any number of things. And other times the recommendations that you bring actually are, you know, really important to bring to the children's cabinet and elevate to a recommendation from the state advisory council. It's tricky because what we've seen in several cycles is that it's tough to figure out the right structure for those recommendations, but your role is to be thinking about how the cabinet as the advisory council would issue a recommendation. So it's important to think about that. It's not the panel issuing the recommendation. It's you advising the children's cabinet. So that's an important distinction. I don't attend the meetings on a regular basis, but I am always happy to join you when the need arises, and if there are moments along the way that make good sense for me to join you and sit in and listen to ideas, I just, you know, need an invitation to do that, and I am happy to make that happen. But I do trust that you all are the professionals with expertise in the field who can really help shape the work. So I know several work groups have work in progress recommendations. We don't have to wait for a particular date on the calendar to bring a recommendation forward to the cabinet. So as things ripen for that next step throughout the year, it's fair game. But my ask is that we work together. The cabinet meets every other month. You guys meet monthly. So we need to plan thoughtfully how best to time bringing forward a recommendation. So ideally, it's something that we work together to be ready for those presentations to the children's cabinet. But it's not like, oh, by this deadline, I have to have a recommendation from this work group. It doesn't work that way. So I will stop there. I am happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
Thank you, Melissa. Does anyone have any questions? Okay, looks like there's none. Well, thank you again for the overview of the panel, and I appreciate you being here, Melissa, as always.
Thank you.
So now we'll talk about meeting procedures. As mentioned, this is the first meeting of our new cycle. And so we're going to go through, you know, the procedures just so that you are familiar with how processes work for each element of our panel. And we'll begin with the Kansas Open Meetings Act. So Executive Order 2002 requires the panel to be subject to the Kansas Open Meetings Act, which says that a representative government is dependent upon an informed electorate. The policy of the state of Kansas is that meetings for the conduct of governmental affairs and the transaction of governmental business be open to the public. So some of the things that you'll note in here is that the chat is not active for us to have conversations or whatnot via chat about anything that's being presented, because that's not something that can be viewed by the public. So that's an example of, the things that we do. We have it, live streamed, and we make sure that any communication or whatnot regarding issues is visible to everybody. If you want to review the Kansas Attorney General's more information, you can look at the Kansas Attorney General's frequently asked questions, and the website is there if you want to look more into the Kansas Open Meetings Act. We have the open forum as mentioned, and this is an opportunity for people to come and share information with the panel. Each speaker will be allowed to speak for up to 3 minutes. Panel members may ask clarifying questions of the person making the presentation. The speaker will have up to 1 minute to respond, and the presiding officer may grant additional time if needed. Information may be submitted to the panel in writing and electronic form as well. This information shall be included in the meeting minutes. Following the Kansas Open Forums portion of the agenda, the presiding officer will acknowledge the participants and announce the panel will determine if any issues will be addressed in future meetings. In the event of a meeting conducted virtually, the panel may require that it will only accept written comments, and the posted agenda shall outline the procedures for providing written feedback. In terms of voting, the panel will strive to first form a consensus in decision-making. If a consensus is not possible, participants may call for a vote, and each panel member is entitled to 1 vote on each matter submitted to a vote. We'd like to have a vote of 2/3. Well, we're required to have a vote of 2/3 of those members present, and that's necessary to approve any formal action taken by the panel pursuant to Article 4, panel actions. The votes of panel members who are participating virtually shall be included on matters submitted to a vote. For panel recommendations, as Melissa stated, this is, one that we have to kind of navigate, kind of be creative in terms of navigation. In terms of timing, but also really including Melissa and her team before we actually prepare a vote, a recommendation to the panel. And she is definitely there to be able to help us craft recommendations that really give all of the information that they need. So the first thing that the recommendation needs to include is a clear identification of the entity that will receive the recommendation. Background and information explaining the issue, and that background should include description of how considerations of equity have informed the recommendation, description of how Kansas families have shaped the recommendation, and a description of how the councils, committees, or work groups with expertise, experience, or jurisdiction related to the issue. And so we want to know who's actually participating in forming this recommendation, be it Kansas families, councils, committees, work groups, etc. And so that we really have all voices impacted by the recommendation involved in anything that we're going to present. In terms of system collaboration, we want the panel to to be able to contact other councils, committees, and work groups that have expertise or experience or jurisdiction related to a particular issue, to share information gathered and identify opportunities for further progress. The panel may also contact other councils, committees, and work groups to request additional information or feedback on draft recommendations. That was really, I appreciate having this in there, Lindsay, because as we were working on or hearing about potential recommendations, there are times when we're working together as a panel, but we also know that there is another committee someplace that's working on a similar issue. And so it's important for us to be able to reach out to that committee and learn more about what they're doing and what they've discovered, and if any of that information can actually help inform the recommendation that we have. And or is there a state organization that's going to lead that recommendation? And it's going to be necessary maybe to reach out to that state organization to get some guidance on on whatever it is that we're trying to recommend, to make sure that what we're doing is not in conflict with anything that they're doing. And if it's a state level recommendation or partnership or collaboration that we'd like to form, Melissa will actually help in kind of doing the handoff to that. The panel may provide recommendations, information, or request information or feedback at any point during the year. So it's not we have to wait till the end of the year, as Melissa stated, before we do any recommendations or anything like that. If we see something that we're excited about and we want to be able to share with the Children's Cabinet, we just can go on ahead and get the process started at that time. We don't have to wait until the end of the year in order to give any feedback or recommendations to the cabinet. The panel will provide an annual report summarizing its work to the Children's Cabinet and Trust Fund at the end of the year. So we're going to turn it over to Ms. Lindsay, and Lindsay is going to share information about the panel SharePoint Hub, which is a resource, a place where we can actually go and access materials that we need and do it in a way that's a little more seamless, and we all have the same information. So Ms. Lindsay, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Cornelia. As you can see on screen, this is a quick overview of some of the information resources that live on the SharePoint. The only members of the SharePoint are those who are a part of the panel. So it is a sort of a closed site to you all and for you all. So I can share a little bit about what already lives there, but by all means, feel free to reach out if there's something else that you think would be helpful. Always open to new ideas, want to make sure that we are facilitating sharing information and resources across the system and across everyone who is involved in the panel. You'll find meeting materials, past meeting materials, current meeting materials. I usually don't post the PowerPoint like from today until right after the meeting, because sometimes we have last minute changes and updates, but I really try to make sure we get that up as soon as possible, so that's available to you all. The tactic work groups each have their own page and document sharing so that you can collaborate in that space together, including in real time. And then news and updates. So I will, provide different things there that might be helpful. And certainly this is one where I would especially recommend that you consider reaching out to me if you have something that you think would be good to share. I'm going to do just a very quick tour. Everyone should already have access. But this is what the homepage of the panel SharePoint Hub looks like. On the first page, we have sort of some news. You can see the most recent news here. I was sharing a link to find more information about the Kansas Early Learning Standards webinar, which was featured on our All In for Kansas Kids monthly webinar series. I have a summary of our June panel meeting, and we'll just take a look at that quickly. For each panel meeting, you'll see a link to view the recording on YouTube. So if you miss part or all of the meeting due to a conflict in your schedule, you can easily get caught up. A quick summary of what was discussed and a link to the meeting minutes and the agenda and the slides. So we'll make sure that everything is included there. I don't have the June meeting minutes up because they were just approved today. If we scroll down a little bit further, there's some quick links for easy access for you all to find things. For instance, there's the Kansas Open Forum submission form. If you want to grab that link quickly and share that with others who might have reached out to you or who you think might be interested. There's also just a quick little form if you have thoughts or ideas on things that need to be included on future panel agendas, or if there are resources that you would like shared out with the panel. You can always reach out by email as well to Cornelia or myself, but this is kind of a nice quick little thing to be able to send something through if you're thinking about it. I have all of the panel meeting dates listed down below, so you should all have that on your calendar with a meeting invite, but if for some reason it's gone or you're in a bind or you need quick access, you can always find all of those here, including the Zoom link to join a meeting. If you click on documents, you can see we have panel meetings and tactic work groups. And I'll go ahead and jump to an example of one of the tactic work groups, which everyone is going to hear about more in a little bit. But each tactic work group has a page, which includes a summary about what this group is working on, sort of what is the charge, the connection to the strategic plan, some basic instructions and things to kind of help that group get going when they got started. A quick link to find where there are notes and resources and other pieces of information relevant to this group, both that were provided to the group to get started, but also that the group has added and utilized in an ongoing basis. And then at the bottom, there's sort of a little comment section. So if panel members or work group members want to add a quick comment to say, oh, I found this new resource, or hey, take a look at this, you can do that there as well. It does kind of require that you're interacting with the page for that to be super helpful, but it is available to you. So there's one for each work group. And that's it. It's not super extensive, but it's a resource that's available for document sharing, collaboration, and hopefully to kind of keep up-to-date information going out to you on a regular basis. So yeah, if you have any thoughts in the future on pieces that you'd like added or ideas, always love that, and just want to make sure that it is a useful resource for you all as you participate and work through different things in your time on the panel. So if there's any questions, happy to answer. And if for any reason you don't have access, reach back out to me, but hopefully I got everybody added to that.
Thank you for that overview. We do have work groups that were identified in our last cycle. We had 4 different tactic areas that we identified as priorities where we were going to work on coming up with or develop recommendations to present to the Children's Cabinet. We'd like to have an opportunity for a representative from each work group to share information about the work group, maybe the next steps or recommendations that they have, so that we can, you as the new members can look at all of the new work groups, what they're working on, and decide what work group they're interested in being in. You also have the opportunity, if you've been on an existing work group and you say, okay, I really want to shift over to something else, that's going to be possible as well. And Lindsay's going to be sending information out in order to get decisions in terms of where everybody wants to go. But the first work group that we'd like to hear from will be the family-friendly workplace work group. And so do we have someone from that work group who is available to speak?
Yes, Cornelia, that would be myself. This is Brenda Bandy with the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition. Thank you for the opportunity to do a little promo plug for the Strategy 4.2 work group. Definitely a fun group that's very productive. So as you can see in the strategic plan, 4.2 is about promoting family-friendly workplaces, and there are 3 subcategories there. One is about leveraging existing resources and programs. Number 2 is about partnering with employers to create the family-friendly workplaces. And number 3 is to demonstrate the commitment to building those conditions that lead to safe, stable, and nurturing relationships. So next slide. Thanks. So the first recommendation, or the first subpoint, what the group is, where we're at right now with recommendations, is a suggestion that there is a creation of a kind of a one-stop shop. Not sure if that's a website or a campaign, but to really align and bring together all of the multiple efforts that are going on across the state, helping employers with family-friendly practices, to align information, policy examples, and perhaps HR support with a partnership with the Society for Human Resource Management. And I do want to emphasize that when this group is using the word policy, we're not traditionally talking about big P policy like passing legislation, although it may be paid leave obviously plays a role in that. But for the most part, we're talking about small P policies within an employer's employment practices. What's in their employee handbook? What's part of their benefits policies? So it's those types of policies and practices that we're talking about. Next slide. So 4.2 is the actual work with the employers to create these family-friendly workplaces. And we really see this as kind of that standalone. We're thinking, again, a resource hub of links to relevant groups. And we know that there are a lot of people working on this and that it really is going to take bringing people together. Some of the topics that have surfaced in our discussions is that we really need to bring in credible partners, credible to businesses, speaking business language. Who is it that they listen to, that they find as credible sources? And we think that's probably the Departments of Commerce and Labor and the Society for Human Resource Management. And there's probably others, but those are the ones that we thought of so far. Next slide. And this is really about the campaign. So building that commitment would be demonstrated through a campaign to align, again, all the work that's happening in the state to really speak, as I mentioned earlier, that business language to employers about why this makes good business sense. So we've come to be using the term making a business case for family-friendly workplaces. We know that this is important to early childhood and to making sure that families are thriving. And it's important that businesses thrive also. So we need to make the connection to the economic benefits for employers as well as part of that campaign. And lastly, the next slide is recognizing that this work group we need to bring together, as you talked about earlier, Cornelia and Lindsay, other parties that are working in this. And I'm so excited to see Kansas Power the Positive. Welcome, Dana. So glad that you're here. Kansas Power the Positive has been working on this for quite some time. We also know that DCF Bethany is working on a wonderful website or web page of resources. And these are just a few of the examples. So we really do see this work group as bringing not only members of this panel, but outside groups as well, so that we can really align and coordinate efforts. So please join us.
I love that. Thank you, Brenda. Very good overview. And so again, that's the overview of our family-friendly workplace tactic work group. You can see that they're already doing great things. And I already have some ideas from some people that might be interested in joining that group. And so but it's a wonderful connection. And what you talked about definitely gives the example of why we want to really reach out and involve other entities who are also working on similar projects. And so that's great. Next, we'd like to have someone, do we have someone available to talk about workforce compensation and benefits? So that's Tactic 611.
Hey you all, my name is Logan Stensing, and I'll speak on group 611, which is the tactic work group dedicated to looking at what are ways we can improve compensation and benefits for early childhood educators in Kansas. So this is a pretty meaty subject. I know it's something that gets talked about a lot in the realm of early childhood, and often we're talking, hey, we know we need to get the workforce paid more. We know we need to invest more, but this group, we're really trying to dive into what does that look like. And so if you're interested in diving into that with us, we would really appreciate it. One of the first steps we took was trying to figure out what the national landscape looks like and what other states are doing in regards to policies related to improving compensation. So if that be like a compensation scale or various forms of stipends. And so as we were reviewing all of this kind of menu of options, we decided, hey, it would be really great if we had a grounding, shared definition of what quality workforce compensation looks like. And so this is kind of the paragraph we came up with. This is definitely not a definitive, definition by any means, and we would love any and all of your feedback on how this could be improved. But our idea is that this can be a guiding statement, like our North Star for when we're evaluating the other compensation or benefit policies. We want it to fit within this definition. So can you go to the next slide, Lindsay, please? Okay. And so we also really wanted to ground our work in what policies we were looking at regarding like what challenges the field was facing. And so, again, the kind of the classics of high turnover within the early childhood workforce. How do we stem that turnover? How do we recruit more people? How do we make the field look be a place where folks can, enter the field and feel like they can stay in it for a long time as well. And then, also incentivizing professional development. And I would say one of the areas that we got closest to with a solid recommendation was the idea around revenue and the need for a protected and sustained revenue source for early childhood funding. So I'm excited to dive more into that with our work group, as well as, it has, quality care is impacted when we don't have funding for quality care. Right now in a lot of communities, unlicensed care and licensed care are on kind of the same playing field, except, unlicensed don't have to deal with as many barriers. So it's really trying to think of how can we truly make sure that quality care is uplifted in our state and invested in. So if you're really interested in that work, it would be really helpful to have more members join. And the next slide, please, Lindsay. Yeah, and so here were some broad next steps that we kind of determined. First we were thinking that we need to really begin to dive into specific strategies. I really liked what one of the other work groups did. I think it was 615, where you all created an Excel sheet of listed, what are the various initiatives and pilots happening across the state. I think that would be really smart for us to do for our next steps, especially with those capacity accelerator grants going out. And there's a lot of innovation happening with how we are supporting the workforce and improving benefits. And then, similar to Brenda's point, we really need to invite more partners to the table and invite more agencies into this conversation, because as we were trying to dive into the weeds of what various compensation or benefit strategies may look like, we realized there were sometimes questions that were unanswered because, we don't have DCF in the room now, or we don't have, folks involved with the cost of quality project and other initiatives. So I think there's just a need for us to make sure that we're all aligned there. And, even a work group a couple weeks ago that I was participating in with Casito, and they have a workforce development group where they're talking about like the same things. And I'm like, wow, we need to see if there's some cross collaboration there. So there's really a lot of exciting opportunities happening. And I think we would love your participation, your insights, and just helping us move forward there. And then the last point was the related to the transitions task force and the listening sessions. We were really interested to see from the listening sessions that the Children Cabinet and the Early Childhood Transitions Task Force engaged in a few weeks back, if there were any specific compensation or benefit strategies uplifted during those to help potentially inform our work. So would love to have your participation. I think this work is so vital to, every one of our work groups is a core component of what we need to be thinking about. But when it comes to some of the most structural barriers for early childhood education, a lot of it aligns with funding. And, to even Melissa's point she made earlier about the nature of our recommendations and, what can happen internally where we can use resources, what are recommendations that end up turning into potentially policy recommendations. This is a pretty policy recommendation heavy group. This is talking about transformative, big change work to the point that we hope that we can institutionalize sustainable quality funding for this field would be the work of that generations have tried to put in. So, we're not trying to do everything in a day. And I think sometimes we were going in with a lot of energy, but it was a really meaty subject. So the more folks we have involved, it would be really helpful. And would love to just keep cracking down on this and get narrowed down to some strong recommendations that we can all fight for. Because I think that's what we want to get to the end of the day is, instead of just talking about, we need to invest in this field, we want to give folks some tangible, hey, this is how you can support us. This is how you can invest in this field and move the state forward. So would love to answer any questions. I'm always available over email, and would love to talk more in depth if you want to get a better picture of what's been going on in the group.
Thank you, Logan. Okay, so I'm loving the theme that I'm hearing, the recruitment themes happening here, so pick me or whatever. And so that is awesome. And, but, people are very, very dedicated, and the reason that people went to work groups that they're passionate about, and that's good. And so I love all of that. And so next I'd like to have someone present from the recruitment and retention work group. Who do we have for that one?
that would be me, Cornelia. Amy
Perfect.
Gottchammer with Googles of Learning Child Development Center. And very much like Logan, we are talking about how do we invest in our workforce. How do we get them into the field and how do we keep them there? But specifically looking at every way that we can do that does not include benefits or the wage compensation piece. So and that's kind of tricky because that's the biggest part, but there really are other pieces to that keep a person at a program even if they don't have the highest wages or a great or any benefit package. So that is a part of it that people do take into consideration. So we did a lot of researching of articles and websites, and as he mentioned, we kind of came up with a long list of things that let me see if we could see the next slide, please, Lindsay. We came up with a lot of these different ideas, like standing up mentorship structures. The marketing campaign, I think, speaks a little bit to what Logan was also saying too, was that the idea is to kind of get so many people to recognize the importance of what it is we do, that the funding becomes sustainable, that we're no longer talking about a grant here and something there, that this is money that continually flows into the early childhood field, because we've talked about it so much, and our society and our state and our major businesses and our government understand how important it is. And we just have got to keep talking about it until they listen. So I think the marketing campaign is really critical, and it will be critical both to Logan's piece, as well as to what we can do in terms of recruitment and retention, even without looking at benefits and compensation and wages. So we looked at giving them professional opportunities, giving them reflective supervision that makes them feel more invested in what they're doing. Funding for communities that that maybe already have subpools stood up to help family child care providers, help them to be able to get out of their homes and out of their programs so that they can participate in professional, local, or regional state boards. This again kind of speaks to that part of being invested in the larger group, being a part of some of the profession in a larger sense. Okay, the next slide, please. We looked at maybe creating a mental health toolkit for providers and directors with just lots of suggestions and resources. We all know that mental health is really critical, even more so since the pandemic. So seeing what we can do for people. This is such a difficult job, especially if you're boots on the ground in the classroom every day. You need these kinds of supports. If you are going to retain people in the classroom, if you're going to keep your teachers and your directors for that matter, you've got to have some mental health resources. And we also talked a little bit about maybe something that could be done with DCF in the way of add-on payments to facilities that would help improve program quality, something along the lines of what is already being done with Head Start. Nothing that's specific to individual children, but an add-on payment that would go to facilities, so that it could allow for better ratios, perhaps allow for a director to pay for an additional person in a classroom so that the lead could get out and get additional plan time, where you can just have a third person in the room instead of two people. So you lower the overall stress in the room, so that, again, it keeps people wanting to keep coming to work because they don't feel that they're so stressed out all the time. They've got an extra pair of hands and eyes to help out in the classroom, so they're more likely to stay, and that keeps retention higher. Better ratios, lower class sizes, and things like that are all possible if you have those add-on payments, and you can get more teachers in the room, or afford to be able to have fewer kids in the classroom. Okay, next slide, please. So we did want to explore that possibility a little bit more and see if it's possible with DCF and some other partners to come up with a way that might work. It may not, but it was just one way that we thought we would look for, particularly because we had identified a specific agency that we might be able to work with. And the rest of these are a little bit amorphous, and we knew we needed to have a target group that we could actually work with if we were going to move forward with any kind of a recommendation. So that was kind of why we worked with that. But the other thing that we were looking at in terms of next step was really taking all of these ideas that we literally threw up on the Google whiteboard, right? And we put it together into a draft spreadsheet. that has all of the current recruitment and retention challenges and some solutions for the future. So we talked about that maybe it could live in the All In for Kansas Kids website somewhere under the strategic plan. We're still open to suggestions on that. And then I thought if I could be allowed to share my screen, if that's possible, Lindsay. Okay, great. Then I will show you what we have. Where is it? Here it is. Okay, so this is a rough draft, everybody. So I'm begging your forgiveness here, but I kind of put it into some broad categories, tabs, right? So some of the concepts that we were working with are ways to help providers feel like professionals. So here's some ideas of things that we could do. We looked at ways that gives them opportunities for advancement. A lot of times there's assistants, there's leads, and then there's a director, and that's it. And there's really nowhere else to go. Feeling that perception of the work we do, that we are not just glorified babysitters, we are not daycare ladies, we are not, taking care of days, right? That the importance of the language, means something, so that in any sort of marketing campaign that we want the average citizen to understand that the quality of the work matters, and that we're really here to do high quality care and education. So that many of us are offering early interventions and all of that, so that that there's that understanding of how important these early years are, and what we do is critical. So any of these kinds of ideas about how we can change the perception of work could lead to increased retention and recruitment. Generally feeling respected, that one of the studies you read reported that high schoolers identified societal respect is as important as salary in deciding whether to pursue a career as an educator. Again, I mentioned these mental health supports, setting providers up for success. This has to do maybe a little bit more with the family child care providers, but giving them ways to think maybe more through that small business lens. So there was a number of ideas like co-ops and shared services and things like that would help those providers be a little bit more successful and not so stressed out in that way. We also weren't entirely sure how to set up all of these different categories. So we had those concepts, and then we also looked at attract, recruit, and retain as subcategories. So we have a number of ideas under how to attract, looking at apprenticeships and community college and 2+2 agreements and all of that. We looked at recruiting, giving them ideas about how to earn micro credentials and opportunities for advancement. And then we looked at a variety of different ideas about just general retention, ongoing professional learning, professional empowerment, leadership, that type of thing. So so this needs some cleaning up. It needs some fine tuning. We are also talking today, when we meet, we're going to look at adding an introductory tab. So when you first open the file, you'll have a page that kind of tells you what's going on, and then maybe a tab at the end that will link a number of these resources, that instead of down here where I have just a link, that will have maybe an annotated bibliography of sorts that says, here's a link to this resources, and this is kind of what you'll see when you get there. So that might be a little bit easier for people to follow than just these links embedded within each tab. So that's what we're looking at now, and then hoping that once we put this all together, that it can live somewhere that's useful to everybody. I'll stop sharing, and that then it'll be something that somebody will find, and that it won't just live in the SharePoint and languish there and nobody will ever see it again. So knowing that it's a lot of work, like Logan said, we're talking with very heavy subject matter. There's a lot to do, and it will take a lot of people. We're not going to be able to accomplish all this. It's not possible. So looking around, trying to see who else might be doing similar work. Maybe that's another tab to add. Who is already doing X, Y, or Z could be another thing to add in there to kind of pull this all together. So if somebody else is interested, they'll also already know where they can connect with somebody if they want to do similar work or not. So any questions on any of that I can answer? I don't think I have another slide. Do I, Lindsay? Okay. Okay. Well, if anybody's interested, we welcome the help. There's a lot to do. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Amy. Do we have someone available to present for the zoning group?
This is Saldana. I'm doing it today. Hear me okay? Okay. So yeah, Eldona Chestnut, Johnson County Department of Health and Environment, Child Care Licensing. And our group, our tactic group was actually made up of, we have children's cabinet, we have a daycare provider, home provider, we have both state and local child care licensing and DCF, and Child Care Aware of Kansas was in our group this year. So we were tasked with looking at the impact of zoning regulations, and it included both HOAs and with actual zoning regulations. So next slide, Lindsay. So kind of what we did to start with, we kind of started with some research base and kind of tried to understand a little bit about zoning and childcare, what was out there, what had been done other places, what was the, well, we knew as licensing and providers what the importance of zoning being a barrier, but we wanted to see what else was available as far as in the literature, et cetera. And so childcare licensing had actually asked surveyors to submit KDHE childcare licensing had actually asked surveyors statewide to submit information on what zoning barriers they were aware of across the state. So we took that information and we started adding to it. I'm from Johnson County, and I would say of all the counties we looked at, there was actually the most prohibitive barriers in my county. But there were similar barriers and others across the state. The Go team with Child Care Aware of Kansas was actually able to also assign a person to kind of start doing a little more digging. So any holes or gaps that were in our spreadsheet, then there was some additional digging into websites, city and county websites, to see if we could find other information. Or there was a discussion of, once we get all this information together, of creating a crosswalk between zoning information and childcare. Like I say, we took this survey, which is quite comprehensive, and it is located on our SharePoint page. We also wanted to see if, like, it's important that planning is involved with this. So if planning thinks ahead, and when they're creating a new neighborhood, a new business structure, whatever, when they're laying out a city plan, that they're considering childcare in that as well. So we did little researches into if there was a planning association and if they had looked at childcare. And there actually is. The American Planning Association actually has some policies regarding childcare and the importance of considering childcare when they're looking at various zoning and planning issues. There is also a Kansas chapter of the Planning Association that hasn't done a whole lot with childcare, but we're hoping to kind of make some inroads with that. Additionally, we decided to gather information from providers, and we wanted to see what providers knew, because we'd already looked at what the surveyors were aware of and what we gathered from city and county websites, but we wanted to reach out to providers and ask them about what they were aware of. And lastly, on this slide, as I mentioned earlier, we were tasked with not only with zoning, but also homeowners association. But we found that zoning was such a big task all by itself that we made the decision we couldn't even address HOAs at this point in time. So that's, once we kind of finalize the zoning piece, then we'll be moving on to the HOA for next year. Okay, or for later this year. Okay, Sarah. Okay. So kind of what we came up with, we realized that this is a big problem for a lot of daycare providers. And as we work, kind of to the previous group, talked about recruitment and retention, we've identified that some of these zoning barriers prohibit, especially home daycares, from even opening, and their location or mainly impacts homes, but there are some center impacts as well. So we felt that this was a big enough issue. It did need to be elevated beyond just our work group. So what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to see more work at a higher level. So those with maybe a little bit more influence, a little bit more sway, I guess you could say. And we're thinking that work should definitely include the at least the Kansas chapter of the American Planning Association, and as well as a lot of the large developers and planners. In Kansas, there's some very large construction companies. So we're hoping that if we bring those folks in, maybe your kind of non-traditional partners to childcare. But if you bring them in and you educate them and you explain the importance and the challenges that these barriers are putting in place for daycare, then hopefully we can get some changes made. Okay, next slide. So kind of our next steps, we literally just got our results back yesterday from the survey that we did with providers. And so just kind of only had a really first glance yesterday when I sent it out to my group. So we're going to be reviewing that and kind of see what it says. It'd be interesting to see how it matches up with what surveyors submitted with what providers submitted and see what kind of information we get there. What we're hoping is something that comes out of this work is to create maybe talking points for providers and advocates so that we feel like some of this work is going to be kind of two-pronged. We want the work to be occurring like at the state level. We want the impact to be, with the larger groups that, are talking about this and hopefully can make a difference. But we also feel this is going to have a grassroots level effort. So kind of the thought was that maybe if talking points, et cetera, could be created, and then partnerships could be put, at the local level, and maybe between licensing and providers, planners, developers, to start going to get to the city councils and city county meetings, and maybe try to start making an impact to get some of these restrictive zones corrected. And let's say we have not gotten to the crosswalk. That may be something that still happen in the future, but we really want it to make a difference. And I think that that's what would help. And it kind of plays into some of the other groups that you've already heard from, that if we can eliminate some of those barriers, that should help to move childcare forward. And as I mentioned, we've just started real scratching the surface on the HOAs on how to best gather information. I think I have one more slide, maybe. No, okay. So basic, I guess our next thing then that I would want to say is that we feel like we've got some pretty good representation, but what we would like to have ideally is we'd like to have another provider or provider group or even parents that are in other parts of the state versus just the urban area, so that we can kind of hear what happens with the smaller. A couple of our, just real quick glance at our data yesterday, some of our smallest counties said, nope, no problem for us. We all work together really well. But we'd like to have those perceptives as well. We'd also really love to have somebody that has maybe city council experience that works with their planning group already, to be able to help us move forward on how do we address these issues and how do we be able to send those recommendations up. And also somebody maybe that has homeowners association experience. So if you've ever served on your homeowners association board or worked with a homeowners association, we'd like to kind of add that experience to our group moving forward. And I guess the last thing I'd say, we are currently working with Melissa Roker to kind of help manipulate, I guess, our recommendations so that they get in the right format and they get to the right people to kind of keep moving this work forward. And if there's questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Aldana. So much going into a recommendation, but also you don't realize the roadblocks unless you're actually doing the work, right? And just so much that needs to be tackled for this that's going to make it better, for providers, but also our children and families in terms of access. So that is great. Well, again, thank you all for the updates. And so what will basically happen is Lindsay is going to send information to everyone in terms of like the panel groups, and she'll give you options of, I think that she'll give you like, okay, well, this is my first choice, it's my second choice or whatnot. And she'll to give you options in terms of panel, the tactic work group that you would like to sit in. We did not actually allot time for work groups to meet today because we have a considerable amount of new people and wanted to give people opportunity to determine which work group that they wanted to be on so that everybody could be included as we get started. If in fact we have work groups, however, that have something pressing where they need to meet today, Lindsay can either leave a leave a room open for you, and or you can like set up your own Zoom if that's something that you would like to be able to do. But again, we did not actually allot time in today's meeting for work groups to meet because we want to be able to include all of the new members. And so just wanted to give that clarity. And thank you everyone again for giving your updates. So Sarah Gardner from KU is going to talk about the process, maybe help us get some, get the wheels spinning on how to take something that's an idea and take that from an idea to a recommendation. And so Ms. Sarah, I will pass it off to you.
Thanks, Cornelia. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Gardner. As you can see on the slide, I'm from KU CPPR. I do a lot of work to support the Kansas Early Childhood System, supporting the Kansas Children's Cabinet, and also serve as sort of the lead of our coordination team for the preschool development grants that Kansas has been getting. And I am just coming to offer some thoughts and insights if it is helpful to you as you were thinking about getting from these lofty ideas and solutions that you have down to what is the right structure of the recommendation. How can we make change as a panel working group? So I just wanted to offer some thoughts, and this is a take it or leave it piece of the presentation. So I hope it's helpful to you. So Lindsay, we can go to the next slide. So the first thing I wanted to kind of anchor everyone in is a little bit of systems change. This is a little bit wonky and nerdy, if you will, but bear with me. You are all part of a systems change effort, and systems are complex, as you guys know. And so I just wanted to anchor everyone in some things to keep in mind as you are approaching your solutions and your recommendations. The first is that systems have a ton of elements to them. They're the most noticeable things. You can think of them as like what I call just nouns. So it's programs, it's services, it's people, it's little bit policy, lowercase p policy. So it's the elements that make up a system. But if you're focusing on changing elements, it's the least, it's the fewest downstream impacts of changing a system. So we're kind of talking about like, what is the right point at which you can have impact? So elements are great to change and elements are great to focus on, but just know that the impact that they have is a little bit smaller. And then you have purpose and function. I'm going to skip interconnections for just a minute. Purpose and function are sometimes the least obvious. So function relates to non-human systems. So you can think of like a policy. What is the function of that policy? Whether it's a state agency policy or a legislative policy, what's the function of that to do? Purpose is really more about human systems, and it's not so much what their stated purpose is, it's actually how you tease out their purpose through how they behave and how they act. So it's really critical to think about what are the pieces of our system, what's their purpose? Meaning, how are they actually acting and behaving, or what's the function of that element? They are the most crucial determinant for behavior change. So if we think about changing our systems and we think about making the ECCE system better for children and families, like getting to a purpose or function change has the greatest impact, and you'll see drastic change. It's often the most difficult to get to because we are, as humans, our behaviors are very much rooted in who we are, and it's very, very difficult to change that. It's also very difficult to change policies and functions of programs and services. The interconnections are how these things fit together. So how does the elements fit together? And you can think of this as maybe a sports team, if you will. So you've got the coach as an element and you have the player as the element. How they interact, that's the interconnections. That's the relationships that hold it together. They operate through what's called flows, and most flows are information flows. It's kind of an academic term, but it's just the conversations you have in a meeting. It's the driveway conversations after the meeting. It's the parking lot conversations. It's the relationships you all build together, and the ability to say, oh, I know that person. I can pick up the phone and I can make that thing happen. Very different if you don't already have that interconnection and that like history of information flow between. So these are the three elements of sort of systems change theory. that you can think of as you're working through your recommendation. What are the elements we have? What's the real purpose or function behind this? And what are the plays between those things? And then the iceberg model on the right, I feel like iceberg images are used for all kinds of things. But for this, it's what we call leverage points. And I would use leverage points also as like solution point. So if you think about, lofty challenges, Logan mentioned like wages. What is the leverage point of that change you were trying to make? Like, so again, thinking through leverage points that focus just on the elements have lower impact. You're just touching the top of the iceberg. The further you get down into that purpose and those deep-rooted mindsets and those deep-rooted system structures, the broader impact you have with that change. So I just wanted to kind of anchor everybody in some of this. If you like this stuff, Danella Meadows is the sort of godmother of systems change, and she's really accessible from an author standpoint. So if you're interested in learning more or wanting some actual tools, she's a great resource to Google. So just some anchoring information on how to change systems and why it's so hard. Next slide, Lindsay. So what are you solving for as you think about your working groups? Strategic plan is a lovely document. I've got mine here. It's falling apart because I've opened it so much. It's a wonderful document. It is not identifying problems. It is identifying tactics and solutions. So you are getting your hands on a tactic or a solution. I would encourage you to take a couple steps back and say, what are we actually solving with this tactic or solution? Not because you don't know it, but because it's nice to anchor your work in that specific thing. Because the biggest challenge we have is we focus on the idea and we lose sight of what we're actually solving for with that idea. It also helps when you've got such a lofty idea or a lofty challenge or a lofty problem, such as how do we make businesses do better things for family-friendly workplaces? Well, that feels very lofty. And so it can help to focus on, well, what's the problem that we're trying to solve? Is the problem that families don't feel supported? Is the problem that there's not enough resources? Like, what is the actual problem that you're trying to solve? And then go through sort of your basic middle school, high school, sort of 5 W's. What's the problem? Who does it affect? When does the problem present itself? And do you have proof? I think a lot of times we, present company included, fall in love with our ideas and can kind of get distracted about like, what are we actually trying to solve? And do I have proof that that's a problem? Where does it occur and why does it occur? These 5 questions can help you shape language in your recommendation. If you can answer all 5 of these in your recommendation, you are already a leg up on the specificity that is needed to move that thing forward. Go to the next slide, Lindsay. So you figured out what you're solving for. What are you going to recommend? This is where I think a lot of times it gets really challenging. So one of the things we do at CPPR is focus on what we call an MVP, or a minimum viable product. This is not unique to CPPR. This is a very common language around picking a sliver of a problem or a sliver of a solution versus trying to eat the proverbial elephant all in one bite. So this is a way to think about an approach you could take to writing your recommendation, or perhaps it's a series of recommendations. So think about that as well. It doesn't have to be in one particular recommendation. Pick a who. So back to those 5 questions. Who are you solving a problem for? If we think about, I'm trying to think of the zoning. There's lots of people involved in that. Who is actually being hurt the most by current policies and processes? Is that who you want to focus on? And then really put yourself in their shoes, map their experience from start to finish. How do they navigate that process of getting licensed in that zoning area? And where do they come up against those barriers? Because I guarantee it will be more than one spot at which the challenge or a challenge presents itself. And once you can see the experience, you can actually start to pick micro solution points, right? You can start to say, I don't have to solve the whole thing. I can solve this point here, or I can solve this point here. And when you do that, you start to see, well, that's a high leverage solve point. This is a low leverage solve point, right? Like this one has a more downstream impact versus this one, which is really just kind of, it's positive. It's not that it's not positive. I don't want to minimize the changes that can happen in a system. In fact, it's the objects in motion stay in motion. So as you make change, as little things happen, momentum starts to build. But identify your solution point. And then we call it a use case, but you can think of it as a, let's just run this scenario out start to finish. If this were to happen, what are the dominoes? So you've got that problem point, you've identified a solution, do a scenario planning. We put that solution in place. What are the ripple effects? What happens? And then let's kind of think through that. And then the last part is the hardest. Save the best for last. Testing your idea, iterating it, and refining it. And what I mean by testing is not necessarily going out and doing the thing you have said you're going to do. Float it by others. If your solution involves childcare providers, go talk to some childcare providers and say, if we did this, what would happen? Not just the good things that would happen, but what are the like unforeseen things that we're not thinking about? So that's where the iterate and refinement comes in. So you can really get to a specific fine point with your recommendation. Next slide, Lindsay. I love this graphic because I don't know if you can see it. There's 3 people in a box and they're like A to B, super simple. And then someone else is like, the rest of the world behind us, guys, let's think about this. So writing the recommendation is hard. It's just really hard. And it's hard because our systems are complex. There's no direct, simple answer. If it was, you all would have found this 30 years ago. So just acknowledge that it is complex and it's going to take iterative times and multiple conversations to figure out, is it the right step that you're taking? And it may not be. And that you learn as much from the things that don't go well as you do from the things that do go well. So kind of keep that in mind too. And as you're writing the recommendation, a lot of you mentioned this already when you were presenting on the tactic work groups, but really understanding the landscape and the different pathways forward for your solution. That's where some of the experience mapping can come into play. What are the different pathways that we could take with this? Because there's lots of different ways that you could solve problems. What has already been done, what's already out there, learn from history. A lot of good has already happened in our system, and particularly at the local level, what is happening at a local level that is really could be a model for change at a state level. We're seeing a lot of that when we looked at some of the accelerator applicants. Talk with your peers and other governance groups. You have a wealth of knowledge just on this panel alone. We often think about like, well, if we had KDHE could do that or DCF could do that. You have KDHE and DCF on this panel. You have them on the Child Care Systems Improvement Team. You have them on the Workforce Development Advisory Group. You have locals bringing very targeted, specific expertise on this panel as well. So don't be afraid to sort of shop your idea around or your thoughts around just in your own governance peers so that you can get more reactions and more buy-in. And then if we can be helpful at all from a cabinet staff and a cabinet support staff, we would be very happy to look at draft recommendations, look at draft approaches, help you do that testing and iterating and refining. If we can be helpful at all, making connections to other folks across the system. If you don't know, if you don't have that interconnection already in place, how can we help you build that interconnection? So I just want to leave you guys with the cheerleading that you all are doing amazing work. When I look at the slides and see the volume of thought that has gone into the recommendations so far and the next steps, I am just excited and really inspired to say we are here to help in any way that we can, and I appreciate all the good work that you guys are doing. So thanks for letting me come and share a little bit about this, and best of luck to you guys this year.
Sarah, thank you. I actually took lots of notes, and listening to you for just my own program even. And as we're trying to, again, always look at what we can do to, what things we can put in place to be able to enhance things. And so I loved the format and how you put all of this together for us. So thank you for that. So now we have an opportunity to hear from, sorry. Okay, we're going to talk about next step, upcoming meetings. And so here's just a calendar of upcoming meetings. Take a screenshot of it. You'll also get, if you haven't already received, there will be invites on to put on your Outlook calendars or whatnot for the meetings. But again, this is our meeting schedule. Next meeting, of course, is going to be on August the 18th. So here's an opportunity to share bright spots. And so at every meeting, we give our panel members opportunities to share things that are happening within your organization or within your community. And so do we have anyone with a bright spot that you would like to share?
Cornelia, hi, I'm Melissa Martin with Sparkquill, formerly known as Communities and Schools of Mid-America. And I want to announce that our transition to Sparkquill was complete as of June 30th. And on July 1st, we officially became Sparkquill. Our work doesn't change, but we will now have a great deal more flexibility to meet the needs of Kansas communities. And we are very excited about it.
Congratulations. I know that kind of change is challenging, right? And so it was probably a big celebration when you got everything done. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Any other bright spots?
This is
Logan.
Brenda Bandy. Oh, sorry, Logan. This is Brenda Bandy with the Kansas Breastfeeding Coalition, and I just wanted to share that our training, how to support the breastfeeding family for childcare providers, is now available in Spanish, and we are offering it 4 times a year. The 2 left this year are in August and September, and I'll provide those dates and registration information to Lindsay for the notes. Thanks.
Perfect. Logan?
Hey y'all, Logan Stensing here, and I'm a policy coordinator with Thrive Kansas, and I work on the Zero to Thrive project. And we are looking to hire some part-time regional field organizers across the state to begin championing the message of early childhood and supporting the workforce. And so we are looking for folks that are interested. So I would love to share information about that opportunity with you all if you're able to disseminate it amongst your networks, because we really would love to get some applicants from across the state. I will be technically our regional field person for Southeast Kansas, but we're looking for folks kind of all across the state. And the idea will be their main objective will be building relationships, one-on-ones with providers, business leaders, community leaders, talking about early childhood and really championing a lot of the work that's happening in the Transitions Task Force. So I'm really excited because we need more folks bringing these messages these conversations that are happening in groups like this to communities. So we're really excited about that. And then another bright spot I wanted to highlight was that our local Allen County Child Care Task Force has a lot of momentum right now. It's been really exciting to see some of the businesses get involved and leaders, and we've had like electeds to schools to everybody, and it's really exciting to see what's happening. So I'll keep you posted as to if we come up with anything exciting. So there's some pretty cool ideas being thrown out. So yep, great seeing everybody.
Very good. Thank you, Logan. Jarvis.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to add a few things we have going on. Many of you know we have our regulation review process going on. It's going pretty well. We're moving pretty aggressively. We're up to meeting pretty much every day now, updating our regs, and I mean there's some long meetings. So we're pretty much on track with our timeline. We have our second provider feedback session tomorrow morning, so we'll be on Zoom tomorrow. We've sent out some correspondence of how you can sign up for that. If there's anyone that hasn't seen that, you can feel free to give me an email and I can give you the link to get you signed up to be a part of that. And also the past few weeks, me and our co-director, Derek Florlodge, we've been traveling the state, going to some regional public health meetings. And from those, we're getting a lot of good information, not only just for our program, but as a whole for early childhood. So I'm looking at taking some of that information we're getting and, seeing how we can improve the system. So that's all I've got.
Thank you. Any other bright spots?
This is Jatisa View. I'm out here in Western Kansas, and this is my first first meeting for being on the panel, and I'm super excited to get started on this. So that's my bright spot right now.
That's awesome. Thank you. Well, glad to have you, and equally excited to have you. So thank you. Any other bright spots? Okay, well, I'd like to give an update on the task force. Logan mentioned the Early Childhood Task Force, and I serve as the co-chair of the Governor's Early Childhood Transitions Task Force. And just to give you a brief understanding of what it is, in case you aren't aware, Governor Kelly actually has partnered with the Hunt Institute, and to form a task force where they're going to, we're looking at ways that we can consolidate all of the programs, funding initiatives, et cetera, that support children and families across the state from an early childhood perspective, and create one new cabinet level position. The reason is because it is very difficult and daunting. It's very challenging for people to have to jump through multiple hoops in order to access what they need. And for providers, it's difficult when you have to provide write 3 different grant applications for the same program to different agencies. The things like that just doesn't make sense. And so we are really evaluating, what this would look like for Kansas, and is it going to be a benefit? One of the things that we did at the end of June is we had a community engagement tour where we went to 9 different parts of our state, where we got a chance to hear from local representatives, people who were interested and passionate about the work of that supports children and families. Zach Benson, who is the early childhood director for the governor, was concerned. He actually had a dream that nobody showed up at the first meeting, right? So you plan all of this big stuff and nobody comes, right? And so that's like your fear, right? And so I told him that he must have gone out and done a rain dance or something like that, because what ended up happening was the exact opposite. In every single one of our meetings, the rooms were full. People were engaged. It was amazing to be able to see the turnout. As I said, we had 9 different stops that were made. We had over 500 people participate in the community engagement tours. And we had people from the childcare industry, from the school districts. We had a police officer at some of them. We've had people who, that we didn't expect to be at the table, And that made for very exciting conversations. One of the things that I walked away with is that when you have common issues that are raised across the state of Kansas, that's a systems issue. It's not something that was just a problem in Wichita or something that was just a problem in Topeka, but we had the same topics that came up across the state. The first being funding, for providers across the state. People did not feel like there was adequate funding to be able to pay for quality. That was mentioned already as we were getting updates, from work groups, but that is the same thing that was heard, across the state. But we know that we've identified that. And that's why in part Kansas has the cost of quality project, that's going on right now, just so they can figure out what do we really need to pay people for quality. But that's definitely something that was identified. And the second across the board in all communities that were visited was compensation, was the lack of work of employees. The teacher shortage is significant, across, unfortunately, in some areas in a dire strait. We had people who said, I'm glad that people are trying to work on the initiatives, but I'm at a place where if I don't have a solution in the next month or 2, I'm going to have to close my center. We had people that were that desperate in terms, because we didn't have the compensation, the funds to actually give the salaries needed to be able to retain employees. And therefore, there were lots of openings. And so, again, across the state in all 9 sessions, that was identified. And then the third common theme was transportation. We know that we can do more in Kansas to improve the transportation system available for children and families. And so, there are also other, things that were identified, but those were the common themes. And I think that the common themes definitely send a message. Some would say, well, it'd be great if we learned something new from each community. And there may be small things that we learn from each community, but I also think that there's power in consistency because that lets you know that it really is an issue. And so we will have our next meeting in the next couple of weeks, and we'll get updates in terms of they'll actually consolidate all of the feedback that we got from the community engagement tours. The goal will be to take this information, you see what we can do, what's the low hanging fruit that we can recommend, what are also the systems issues that need to be discussed as we're trying to figure out what this potential transition will look like for the state of Kansas. And all of the work from the task force will actually be done by the end of year, but the year in December. So a recommendation will actually be given to the governor at that point, and then we'll see from there whether or not that's something we can do. But it was nice to be able to meet some of you in person. It was nice to see you besides outside of the box, and I was hungry. So there's a human being there, not just this box with a face. And so that was just really nice to be able to connect with some of you in person. And look, I will give you updates as we move along with the task force if there's anything meaningful or whatnot that I think especially relates to the work that we're doing here in the panel. Please remember that we have agenda items and resources that will be in the panel SharePoint Hub. Any of the recommendations or any of the documents or anything like that people mentioned today, please make sure that you send it to Lindsay, and she will also put that on the SharePoint Hub so that everybody has access to it, and she'll send it out via email as well. But she'll put it in the SharePoint Hub so that all of that is centrally located for people. All of our upcoming meetings are going to be via Zoom, and we did opt to keep them via Zoom in the beginning because we really wanted to have a statewide reach, and we know people, and we want people to come from the entire state, and we wanted to make it friendly for people in terms of travel. And so all of our meetings will be via Zoom, and our next meeting is actually going to be on August the 18th. And then our next Children's Cabinet meeting is going to be Friday, August 4th from 9 a.m. to noon. So with that being said, I would like to thank you all for your time today. Thank you for our new members. Welcome. We're glad to have you. I think we had over 20 new members on the panel, this time around. And so that's amazing in terms of, people who are committed, to working with and supporting our Kansas children and families. And for our returning members, we are glad to have you back and glad that you chose to continue the good work that you've been doing. So you all have a wonderful day, a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to seeing you all again in August. Take care. Bye.